The Battle of Anchem was a battle fought between two factions of the royal family in the Ethiopian Empire. The battle was fought to determine who would rule the empire, Empress Zewditu or King Tafari Makonnen. The Battle of Anchem is memorable because the pro-Zewditu forces were not openly supported by Empress Zewditu. The battle is also memorable for the use of both psychological warfare and aerial warfare by the pro-Tafari forces. Background: on the 27th of October 1928, 32-years-old Duch.seb Makonnen, the future Emperor Haile Selassie I, was crowned king. He was crowned by Empress Zewditu. Since 1916, during Tafari's minority, Zewditu had been regent. As regent, she exercised the real power in Ethiopia. The crowning of Tafari as king caused him to begin exercising power at the expense of Zewditu. His crowning also caused two factions to develop within the royal court. One faction was pro-Tafari and one faction was pro-Zewditu. The husband of Zewditu, 53-year-old Duch.seb, imagined a future where Zewditu remained empress and he himself would be proclaimed emperor. He was clearly the leader of the pro-Zewditu faction. Within a month of Tafari being crowned king, the rare Oromo revolted in Wollo province. As king and with the tacit approval of the empress, Tafari called for the governors of several neighboring provinces to suppress the Oromo revolt. Ras Mongasha from Aksum in western Tigray, Ras Gugza Aras Selassie from Makal in eastern Tigray, Dajaz Machilubiru from Semin, and Ras Gugzavela from Big Emda were called upon. Gugzavela and others were unhappy with the rise of Tafari. As a result, the response to Tafari's call was less than enthusiastic. Efforts to suppress the Oromo were dissipated in palace intrigue, and the revolt continued. A trusted cousin of Tafari, Ras Imru Haile Selassie, was made Shum of Wollo in an effort to end the revolt. In addition to not being happy with the rise of Tafari, Gugzavela tried to rally traditional Ethiopia to his side in support of his wife, the empress. In the opinion of this faction, Tafari was too young, too modern, and it was rumored that he had even secretly converted to Roman Catholicism. Gugzavela wrote letters to the leaders of Tigray and Gojam seeking support for his revolt. He wrote to Ras Mongasha and Ras Gugza Araya Selassie of Tigray and to Ras Haile Tekel Haymanot of Gojam. All three initially appeared supportive, but, after reconsideration, none responded to the letters from Gugzavela and all three provincial leaders failed to join him. On the other hand, the rebelling Oromo did agree to join forces. Battle. Tafari Makonnen called a chitet, the traditional mustering of the provincial levies. Ostensibly he was raising an army to finally crush the ongoing revolt in Wollo. At the time, Ras Gugzavela was not in open revolt and Empress Zewditu was still pleading with him not to go into open revolt. In the end, as part of the government, the empress was in the strange position of being formally on the same side as King Tafari and being against her husband who was rebelling on her behalf. The response to the chitet, like the initial call to suppress the revolt in Wollo, was less than enthusiastic initially. The newly appointed Minister of War, Ras Mulugeta Yegazu, was only able to raise the Mahel Safari with 16,000 men pledged to it. Worse, by January 1930, Mulugeta Yegazu found himself with only 2,000 men as he gathered in Dessie. Worse yet, Gugzavela was now in open revolt and he had already gathered an army in Debre Tabor of 35,000 utterly devoted men. He was able to do this even without the forces from Tigray and Gojam. On the 24th of February, Empress Zewditu and King Tafari issued the imperial proclamation of Yukatit. The proclamation declared that Ras Gugzavela was a rebel. Attached to the proclamation was an anathema anathema signed by the Coptic Abuna Kyrillos and by 5 new bishops, Saueros, Abraham, Petros, Mikhail, and Isaac. The anathema was addressed to all monasteries of Begemda. It concluded, "And therefore, you may follow Ras Duch.seb, you may attach yourself to him. Be cursed and excommunicated. Your life and your flesh are outcasts from Christian society." The devotion of many of the men following Ras Duch.seb was shaken by the proclamation and its attached anathema. In mid-March, Ras Mulugeta marched the Makonnen-The from Dessie to pro-Tafari to face the rebellious Duch.seb. With him were 5 cannon, 7 machine guns, and something entirely new for Ethiopian warfare: aircraft. Psychological warfare. On the 28th of March 1930, when Duch.seb's army crossed the border of Begemda province moving towards Shela province, it was met with an unusual sight. 3 Ethiopian government biplanes flew overhead. In 1922, Tafari Makonnen had first shown interest in military aircraft and, by 1929, a small Ethiopian air arm was under development and was now used for the first time. The biplanes dropped numerous copies of 2 specially created leaflets onto the advancing army. One leaflet bore a message from the newly arrived Abuna Kyrillos. The message from Kyrillos was that anyone who fought against the government forces would be excommunicated. A second leaflet was from King Tafari and Empress Zewditu, and it declared Duch.seb to be a rebel. In an example of psychological warfare, the leaflets appealed to the known conservative and religious sympathies of the forces fighting for Duch.seb. Some of his army started to desert him. Biplanes and the plains of Anchem. On the 31st of March, both armies met at pro-Zewditu on the plains of Anchem. At 9 a.m., the biplanes once again appeared. But this time bombs and not leaflets were dropped upon Duch.seb's army. At this point in Ethiopian history, aerial warfare was still quite novel, unprecedented, and totally unexpected. More of his army deserted Duch.seb. The imperial army arrayed against Duch.seb included Fitorari Wandosan Kasa in the center, Kegnazmach Ilubiru on the right, and Fitorari Fikramariam on the left. Fitorari Wandosan Kasa was the eldest son of Ras Kasa Haile. Kegnazmach Ilubiru commanded the troops from Semine, and Fitorari Fikramariam commanded the troops from Wollo. In reserve were forces under Ras Mulugeta Yegazu and Duch.seb or Yenardo. According to Time magazine, by the time of battle, the 2 opposing armies were a mismatch. Duch.seb and his army of Begemda numbered approximately 10,000 men and were armed with 10 machine guns and 2 cannons. Opposing them was a much better equipped army of approximately 20,000 men loyal to the central government. Battle began, and after 4 hours, the imperial forces under Fitorari Wandosan Kasa and Kegnazmach Ilubiru gained the upper hand. With the tide turning, Ras Duch.seb's shaken army started to desert him in large numbers. Coup de grace. Shortly after midday, Ras Duch.seb was surrounded and isolated. It was at this time that the coup de grace was delivered. Duch.seb was called upon to surrender. Mounted on a white charger he chose to fight on, was shot several times, and was killed. Fitorari Shumai, the second in command of the army of Begemda, fought on until he was captured later in the afternoon. What little was left of the army then completely disintegrated. Duch.seb's Oromo allies never showed up during the battle. Instead, they arrived a day later. Duch.seb walled Gabriel and the army of Sidamo province entered pro-Tafari unopposed. With the death of Duch.seb and the destruction of his army, the rebellion was ended. Aftermath. Gondar, the capital of Begemda province, was taken without resistance soon after the Battle of Anchem ended. Fitorari Wandosan Kasa benefited because his father, a loyal ally of Tafari, was given all of the lands formerly controlled by Duch.seb. As a result, one Dosan Kasa was made the Shum of Begemder province. Within 3 days of the death of Gugzavela, Empress Zewditu was dead of natural causes. On the 2nd of November 1930, about 8 months after the passing of Zewditu.The, Makonnen was proclaimed Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia.